Hey everybody, I want to spend a couple of moments here today talking about the critical key to empowering other people. I know a lot of us spend a lot of time thinking about how can I get empowered, but I really believe with all my heart that one of the most important things that we can do just as human beings is not only be thinking about ourselves, that's important, nothing wrong with that, but also to think about how we can empower other people. You know, I literally just last night came back from spending a couple of days in what is called Sucker Creek First Nation. And if you know Canadian history, you know that Canada has a very difficult and sorry past when it comes to how we have treated our Indigenous peoples and communities. It's actually quite horrible. I don't want to go into it, but in my career, I've been really blessed to go to, well over 20 different First Nations is what we call them across all four Western provinces in Canada. And one of the things that's really apparent to me is that these cultures have figured out a whole bunch of things, and many of them figured out a whole bunch of stuff that in Western culture we haven't yet figured out. One of the things they have figured out is how to empower people. You know, there was this anthropologist, and her name is Dr. Angeles Arrien. And she actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out what is it about Indigenous people all over the world that kind of pulls and ties them together. So you could imagine thousands of years ago, long before there were cell phones or fax machines or telephones or email, these Indigenous communities often weren't communicating directly with each other, and yet they had the same cultural practices. So Indigenous communities in Australia and, and Asia and Africa and South America and North America and even Europe had very similar cultural practices. And one of the cultural practices that this Dr. Angeles Arrien discovered that Indigenous cultures shared, which I believe led to massive amounts of empowerment, particularly in their young people, is the practice of acknowledgement. Now, acknowledgement is this idea of I see you. And, I don't want to take any credit away from the movie Avatar. And if you've seen the sequel, the second one, it's like super long. But you know what? There's this idea in Avatar of like, hey, I see you, right? I see you. I'm looking beyond the surface. I'm looking beyond just what's on the outside, and I'm looking beyond what you're going through in the moment. I actually see you. You see, as human beings, we so desperately need to be seen. We need to be heard. We need to be understood. We need to have people in our lives who go beyond the surface of the moment and understand the journey that we're on. You know, the journey that we're on. I mean, imagine if you had people in your life who weren't looking at you through the lens of judgment, who weren't looking at you through the lens of what are you accomplishing in this moment? What are you going through in this moment? But they actually could see the whole picture. Now, seeing what you're going through in this moment is important, but seeing people, having people who see you way beyond this moment and actually understand that progression and that journey that you're on, because I'm on a journey, you're on a journey. It was so cool over these last 2 days to work with a group of young people and to train them in public speaking. And we've all heard the statistics that one of the greatest fears that people have is the fear of public speaking. And so we've run this course for many years called Elevate EST, where we break people free of the fear of public speaking. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by teaching them to understand and tell their story. There's something about you knowing your story, being secure in your story, understanding your story, where you've come from, where you are now, what it is you're heading towards, and where it is you're going. That is the journey. So I open this by talking about the critical key to empowerment, and I believe the critical key to empowerment is acknowledging people, helping them to be validated and supported in their story, not judging them, not putting them down, not looking at them through the lens of, oh, I'm better than you, or you're not as good as this guy or that gal, but actually seeing them, acknowledging them. And so this Dr. Angeles Arrien, anyways, shared that there was 4 specific things that Indigenous communities would acknowledge each other about. And this, I believe, is part of why these communities were so healthy long before cultures like ours actually came and messed them up, which is not very good. And we're actually now hopefully trying to get involved in the process of reconciliation. This needs to happen in a massive way. It needs to be accelerated. But as we're on our way there, what can we learn from these cultures? And one of the things that this Dr. Angeles Arrien talked about in acknowledgement was acknowledging people in 4 ways. The first was in their skills. Do you know that every person around you has incredible skills? So what if, rather than seeing people through the lens of deficit, what if you started seeing people through the lens of their skills? If you want to empower people, the very best thing that you can do to empower people is to acknowledge their skills, to acknowledge their competencies, to acknowledge the incredible tools that they have in their toolkit. So number 1 is skills. Number 2 is their character. Now, your skills are what you can do, but your character is who you are, particularly when no one is looking. I'll tell you what, people need their character acknowledged. When they're honest, we should be acknowledging it. When they operate in integrity, we should be acknowledging that. When they operate in courage, then we should be acknowledging that. Why? Because we have some real problems with character today in our culture, particularly Western culture. We have a ton of corruption. We have a ton of unethical behavior from government leaders, particularly in Canada. We have a ton of people who don't understand the power of living a good life, being a good person. They think it's all about just looking good on social media and canceling other people. And so, we got to acknowledge the character in people. I acknowledge the goodness in people. Call it forth, right? Celebrate it. The third thing that Dr. Angeles Arrien talked about in terms of acknowledgement was their appearance. Now, of course, this was thousands of years before TikTok and filters and Instagram and all that stuff. So we talk about appearance. The indigenous cultures weren't acknowledging, oh, you look really hot or sexy or things like that. They were acknowledging how you show up. I'll tell you what, you show up and I do a certain way. You and I, every single one of us, has this thing called presence. And I'll tell you what, your presence matters. Do you come into a room with healthy, empowering energy? Do you come into a room with empathy? Do you come into a room with a vibe that actually sends a message of joy and happiness and love and acceptance? I'll tell you what, when these cultures would see that kind of appearance, they would acknowledge it. They would celebrate it. That doesn't mean you got to be an extrovert. As a matter of fact, sometimes extroverted people can be the most irritating people, right? Sometimes. Certainly not always, but sometimes. But I'll tell you what about just acknowledging how it is that people show up? I'll tell you, it takes a lot of courage for people to show up. It takes a lot of dignity for people to show up, especially if they're showing up as themselves rather than trying to be somebody that they're not. And so ancient indigenous cultures would acknowledge, hey, I see you. I see how you're showing up today. So they would acknowledge, number 1, the skills. Number 2, the character. This is all Dr. Angeles Arrien, anthropologist. Number 3, their appearance. And number 4, and this is so powerful, the impact that we've made on others. Every single one of us is leaving a footprint every single day. Every single one of us. Me, you, all of us. And what does that mean? That means that footprint either has a positive impact or a negative impact. That footprint either empowers people or it disempowers people. And so when you think about it, these indigenous cultures were acknowledging the impact. They were saying, I see you, and I see the fact that you have a ripple effect, a positive, empowering ripple effect on the people around you. So, hey, we started this video by talking about how can we empower others. I'll tell you, we empower others through the practice of acknowledgement. Acknowledge their skills, acknowledge their character, acknowledge their appearance or how they show up. And number 4, acknowledge the impact they have on others. If you could start as a leader, as an executive, as an entrepreneur, just as a parent or a person, if you could start doing those 4 things, I guarantee you, you will empower everyone around you, and you will be a pleasure to be around. Thanks so much for tuning into this video. Would you take a moment and go to thrivingcoachingprogram.com? We have some incredible programs there for you that will change your life, elevate your business, take your finances to the whole next level, and really improve your life. So please do check it out. That's thrivingcoachingprogram.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video below. Thank you so much.